Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now most Steam machine reviews I've read draw comparisons to discrete desktop graphics cards. An exact match doesn't exist, though this card represents the closest architectural equivalent available. Both share a Navi 33 GPU based on RDNA 3, paired with 8GB of GDDR6 memory over an 8-lane PCIe 4.0 interface. That said, this Radeon card boasts a clearer spec advantage over Valve's compact gaming setup. It features more compute units and RT cores, 32 up from 28, alongside an increased boost clock and higher power consumption. What we have here then is the AMD RX 7600, a $269 graphics card that targeted 1080p gamers and launched to rather tepid reviews back in 2023. Improvements over the previous generation 6650 XT were minimal, often exhibiting single-digit performance bumps in native resolution gaming. I picked up this power colour version for a couple of £100 and I want to show you what it's capable of in case you're thinking about putting together your own custom Steam machine, perhaps with a bit less to spend overall. I've gone for a modest yet capable CPU pairing, my trusty 6-core 12-thread i5 12400F, as well as 16GB of DDR5 clocked at 5600MHz. Instead of SteamOS, I've installed Bazzite on my 1TB PCIe 4 NVMe SSD today. Bazzite is a custom gaming-focused Linux distribution designed to replicate the seamless console-like SteamOS experience on standard desktop PC hardware. It has better compatibility and we've installed it on a few different machines here on the channel. This time I created a bootable USB with the KDE version, which is like SteamOS's desktop, and opted for the traditional desktop experience. We've covered installation before, so I won't go through it again, but I'm pleased to report that Bazzite is very snappy and incredibly smooth on this hardware combo. But let's talk about gaming. The Steam Machine GPU is closer to the laptop version of the 7600, the 7600M, but the standard card should offer better performance across the board. This is sort of like the improved Steam Machine gaming experience, though 1080p is still the way to go for the sake of the VRAM buffer. First of all, I love how well my older games run on Linux. GTA 4 requires a couple of tweaks under Windows to get it functioning at its best, but here it's super smooth at the highest settings because it runs with DXVK out of the box. It still looks very respectable for a game of this age too. I still find myself spending a couple of hours per month exploring Liberty City and just winding up the various NPCs that roam the streets. As with any Linux distro, we are locked out of certain multiplayer games because of incompatibilities with some anti-cheat software. Battlefield 6, Call of Duty and GTA Online, for example, will not work. We can still enjoy GTA Enhanced single player though, and with our 8GB 7600 we can even use the very high ray tracing preset for at least 60 FPS. Our average overall was 75 FPS with a 1% low of 61 and a 0.1% low of 55, so as we can see it was a very consistent and smooth experience overall, though you may want to consider turning the preset down to high instead or toggling a few of the ray tracing options off with this 8GB graphics card, but it was a respectable performance from it nonetheless. Moving on to Red Dead Redemption 2, and this was a bit of a pain in the bum to set up with Steam because I actually have the Rockstar Games Launcher version. I think it may have come to PC on that platform first before it came to Steam. I know there's a reason I bought it on the Rockstar Games Launcher instead, and in order to actually get it functioning we have to add the Rockstar Launcher as a non-Steam game, install the game as usual, and then it will boot up and run just fine. 1080p with the ultra textures and everything else set to high with TAA set to high, we got an average of 98 frames per second, though we did see a few heavy dips and drops in and around Valentine, like we go from 80 frames per second down to 60 or sometimes even lower, but for the most part it was pretty decent, and I think you could certainly get away with a higher resolution here, if you wanted to. Up next we have Cyberpunk 2077 at 1080p with the Ultra preset once again, with medium crowds selected. I chose medium crowds for the sake of our 6-core 12-thread i5, which will struggle a little bit more when we set this option to high. With these settings we saw 77 frames per second overall, a 1% low of 65 and a 0.1% low of 59, so it was really smooth overall, and Night City is still looking great. Again, I don't have this one on Steam, but I actually used the Heroic Games launcher to install GOG Galaxy, installed Cyberpunk through that, and then added the game to Steam as a non-Steam game. That was the only way I could get it to run. Launching it through GOG, through the Heroic launcher, and it wouldn't boot, but adding it through Steam like this got it to work just fine. Of course, if you have the Steam version, then you won't have to jump these hurdles, it should just work straight away. Now in Cyberpunk, of course, we can also enable ray tracing as the 7600 does support it, but my advice would be to leave it switched off unless you're using one of the lower RT presets. But again, that strikes me as a little bit pointless, because I think if you're switching ray tracing on, you're going to want to notice it. Now with RT medium and RT reflection switched on, we were getting over 30 frames per second with FSR 2.1 auto. 60 was more challenging, even with the FSR performance mode. This wasn't possible, at least most of the time, and FSR 2.1 auto keeps things looking fairly sharp. I'd recommend capping the game to 30 frames per second in order to make this feel a bit smoother, but the percentile lows were okay. Counter-Strike 2, of course, one of Valve's own games here, runs absolutely fine. 286 frames per second with the high preset. MSAA was switched off because it does impact our frame rate, and ultimately I don't think it's worth enabling, especially as a fast-paced online multiplayer shooter here. The 1 and 0.1% lows were also very good, 163 and 108, so no significant and unwanted drops when using this hardware under Bazzite, but this is what I expected when using this Linux distribution here. A very nice average, and more than enough to remain competitive, especially if you're a better player than me, which isn't difficult. Arc Raiders up next, 1080p with a high preset and TSR set to 100% scaling for 94 frames per second. Again, it was a very smooth result here. 64 was that 1% low, and our 0.1% low came in at 56. We've got a bit of a storm going on screen here, so perhaps this is impacting our performance a little bit, but it still held up fairly well, and it still looked good too. No problems to report with Arc Raiders. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 up next, slightly more challenging for the 8GB RX 7600, especially at the high preset. I just nearly lost my voice then, but bear with me. SMAA2TX was also enabled for 78 frames per second, a 1% low of 64 and a 0.1% low of 57. I actually noticed that this runs a little bit smoother in Bazzite compared to Windows. We saw a few more dips and drops. Last time I tested this out with Windows, which was basically before making this video. I will run a full comparison if you want me to, but as for this result, well, it was fairly consistent overall, and I think with these settings we are encroaching of course on that 8GB of VRAM, as we will do in a lot of modern titles, but this one held up fairly well despite these obvious limitations, and it was more than playable in and around town and when venturing into the scary woodlands as well. Marvel Rivals also surprised me with the high preset and lumen switched off, along with screen space reflections off. Now I ran the benchmark, first of all, the built-in benchmark, and we saw significantly less frames per second than we were here actually playing the game. 3 different games actually, and we saw an average overall of 119 frames per second with a 1% low of 84 and a 0.1% low of 74. This one performed better than I anticipated on the RX 7600 non-XT, by the way. Palworld with TSR did exhibit a few problems, as you can see by these percentile lows, but we averaged 90 overall. The 1% low was 54 and the 0.1% low was 24. Been getting back into this one recently, and I have to say that on the 7600 the average was pretty good, though you may want to turn a couple of the options down. During my initial half an hour gameplay period, we did see a few little stutters here and there, though not as many as I did in Windows when I tested this card to see if it was working initially. Baldur's Gate 3 to finalise with the Ultra preset, no problems with this one. Just like in a couple of other examples, we could probably boost the resolution up to 1440p if we wanted to here, because we were seeing over 100 FPS, well just about 101, the 1% low was 75, and the 0.1% low was 55. So overall, I think the RX 7600, the better than Steam Machine GPU equivalent, is actually alright. Now 8GB of VRAM may put a lot of people off in 2026, but I think if you're targeting 1080p gaming, you have less to spend. I don't think it's a terrible option for the money, but there may certainly be better choices out there. It's just worth consulting the used market and used selling sites where you live. Now, as I said before, this card is probably going to offer better than Steam Machine performance across the board. So hopefully this gives you a decent idea of what to expect if you want to install Bazzite or SteamOS instead of Windows. Bear in mind that some games won't work, specific multiplayer titles of course, but Bazzite runs really nicely on this GPU, and I'd certainly recommend it if you're looking to move away from Microsoft's operating systems. But let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.